Hi, I'm Gary Bembridge, and this is another of my tips for travelers. In this episode, I'm going to tell you the 12 ways that you could find yourself being kicked off a cruise. But before I do that, remember, please subscribe, and every single week you'll get another video packed full of tips and advice to help you make more of your travel time and money. So what are the 12 ways that you can find yourself being kicked off a cruise? Well, first of all, you may find yourself never even getting on the cruise, because if you don't have the right documentation, which these days increasingly is a passport, a valid passport, normally with 6 months still to go before it expires, and often, depending on where you're going, visas. Some cruise lines will not let you get on board without the right visas if you're going somewhere exotic, because they're not allowed to actually venture into that space carrying passengers who do not have a visa to land. So absolutely make sure that you've got your passport, and before you go, check, do you need any visas? The second thing is also one where you may find yourself not even getting on the cruise, so being kicked off before you've even got on. And that's if you refuse to go through security. Cruise lines now have airport type security, and everything gets screened, including yourself. And if you refuse to go through that, you will not be allowed to get on the cruise. The third one is kind of obvious. If you try and smuggle on board anything that's either illegal or prohibited by the cruise line, you're likely to find yourself kicked off the cruise. So some obvious things, for example, recreational drugs. There's many cases of people being caught with recreational drugs on board and they have been thrown off a cruise. But there also may be things that the cruise line does not allow you to bring. So for example, many cruise lines are clamping down on alcohol. They will not let you bring on board alcohol. If they find you trying to bring a lot of alcohol on board, you may find yourself kicked off. And that could even be trying to return from an excursion with lots of booze. But also make sure that you're not bringing on board anything prohibited. So for example, most cruise lines will not let you bring a drone on board. Most cases with things like alcohol and drones, the cruise line will normally confiscate those and hand them back at the end of the cruise. The fourth way you can get kicked off a cruise, and this is becoming more and more common, is if you refuse to take part in the muster drill. Now, by law, cruise lines have to do muster drill, and if you refuse to go to the muster, the cruise line is likely to throw you off the cruise. You absolutely have to go. And on many cruise lines, even if you're doing back-to-back cruises, they require you to go to every single muster. You must go to the muster station, have the security briefing, and you also learn about evacuation procedures, and of course, you also learn how to put on your life jacket. Now, the fifth way you could get kicked off a cruise is if you do not pay attention to the all aboard time. There's many videos of people running along the quayside as a ship departs. Ships will leave on time. So unless you're on a cruise line organized excursion and it's running late, the ship will wait for you. So if you're doing your own thing in a port and you're not back by the all aboard time, it's very unlikely the ship will wait. It will leave without you and you'll find yourself stranded in a port. Now, it is possible sometimes to rejoin the cruise at your own cost and your own expense. It can be quite a hassle if you don't have things like your passport. And there is a chance that the cruise line will just disembark you completely. If you're really concerned about it, always go on a cruise line organized excursion, because they will always wait for late excursions. The sixth way is an unfortunate one, but if you fall ill or injure yourself and actually require a hospital level of treatment, you will be disembarked from the cruise. So the cruise lines have medical centers and they can deal with everyday things, but if you get really ill and need sort of hospital level attention, or they're concerned about you, or you injure yourself, you will be disembarked at the port. Now, very important, this is going to be at your own cost. So you absolutely need to make sure that you have travel insurance when you go on a cruise that is going to cover you if you have to leave a ship because you're injured or ill, because you're going to have to cover your hospital costs, you're going to have to cover getting back home, you might have to cover costs of people traveling with you to stay with you. So I've been on many cruises where you'll see people being disembarked for medical reasons. One definite way to get yourself kicked off a cruise is to throw something overboard, especially if it's cigarette butts, because they are extremely dangerous. There are very strict regulations about throwing things overboard. You can throw nothing overboard whatsoever. So even the olden days where you used to practice things like shooting golf balls off the back of a ship, or you used to throw streamers off ships, you are not allowed to put anything over the side of the ship, and you will be thrown off a cruise if you're caught doing that. Bear in mind the security cameras all over the place, particularly on decks, and if they see you throwing things overboard, you will be thrown off the cruise. The eighth way of being thrown off a cruise is pranks. So if you joke about a man overboard or anything related to bomb threats, you will be thrown off a cruise. The resources and the effort behind man overboard and bomb threats is enormous, and anyone joking around and pranking, you will find yourself thrown off the cruise. If you break the law either in the port or on the ship, you will be thrown off the cruise. So let me give you some examples. I've been on a cruise before where actually some of the dancers on board were caught shoplifting in one of the stores in a port. They were thrown off the cruise mid-contract. The same is true of passengers. So if you do anything in a port, you're caught by the police or reported, the cruise line will throw you off. The same on board. So if you're caught thieving on board or doing something inappropriate on board, you will also be bundled off. Another very important thing to consider is underage drinking. Many cruise lines will throw you off a cruise if they catch you encouraging and facilitating underage drinking. That's particularly important because on some cruise lines, and based on where you're cruising, they will follow the US rule on drinking. So people have to be over the age of 21. Other cruise lines, particularly when they're in Europe, will follow the more European approach of drinking is allowed over 18. But if you're caught buying drinks and allowing underage kids to drink, you're very likely to be thrown off a cruise. So the next one, and this is one that often gets quite a lot of publicity in the newspapers and on television, is being disruptive on board. So if you have some big row, some big fight, particularly a punch-up fight, you'll find yourself bundled up and chucked off on the next port. There have been some very spectacular reports about fights breaking out on a cruise ship. For example, there was an Australian family on a Carnival cruise who got in a big fight on board. The whole family was collected together and thrown off at the next port. There have been examples of lounger rage where people got really irate at people hogging lounges on board, which is a big bugbear of cruisers, and they've got into a big fight about it, thrown lounges around. They have been thrown off. There's also a couple that once got very irate, felt people being anti-Semitic and started a 4-letter tirade. They got bundled up and thrown off at the next port. So again, abusive behavior and fighting is not tolerated. Now the next example of being thrown off is something that I've seen a couple of times. And this is where people break a curfew during a norovirus outbreak. Now, obviously, norovirus outbreaks do happen occasionally on cruise ship, not as much as people think they do. But one of the ways that the cruise lines deal and try and get to grip with the norovirus outbreak is people who have the symptoms are confined to their cabin, and they could be confined to the cabin for a number of days. If you break that curfew and start going around the ship, there is a very strong chance that the captain will throw you off the cruise. And I've seen it happen twice on 2 different cruises where people have been disembarked because they didn't stick to the curfew. One of the ways that cruise lines try and deal with norovirus outbreak is by ensuring that people who have the symptoms aren't out and about the ship spreading it. So if you do break the curfew on norovirus, you could well find yourself being disembarked. So what is the 12th way of being thrown off a ship? Very simply, being rude, abusive, or aggressive to the captain and the crew. So even if you're uptight and upset about something that's going on the cruise, be very cautious about how you deal with it. Be firm, be assertive, do not bang the table, do not swear, do not get aggressive. Because if you are seen as being abusive and aggressive toward the crew, the captain has the right to actually disembark you. And within the actual cruise contract, which you approve when you buy your ticket and pay for your ticket, you've agreed not to be abusive and rude and aggressive towards the staff. So no matter how frustrated you are, try and be calm, try and be assertive, and do not be rude and aggressive. There's a surprisingly large amount of ways that you can be thrown off a cruise. These are the 12 most common ones that I've come across. If you have any other examples, of course, where you know people are being kicked off a cruise and they're not included in these, I'd love to hear from you. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd love it, of course, if you watched many more of my Tips for Travelers videos, because they'll help you hopefully make much more of your precious travel time and money on both land and at sea.